Okay, I think you can hear me good. So welcome everybody to hear our session and story about abusing Azure Active Directory. But before we are going to introduce ourselves, we need to confess that we did a bad thing yesterday. So we both attended the keynote, and we were sitting on the back row, and we noticed that we can't see the bottom row of the screen. So sorry, Black Hat, but we ruined your template. So we switched it around, so now you can better see what's on our slides. So hope we are not going to kick out because of this. Anyway, so my name is Dr. Syynimaa. I'm a professional Azure AD abuser. So I work for SecureWorks, and I work there as a senior security researcher. I'm Microsoft MVP on security, and I'm also Microsoft's most valuable researcher, or one of them. And second year row. And what else? I'm the guy who created a tool called AAD Internals. It's an open source toolkit. I demonstrated it yesterday on Black Hat Arsenal. And actually, all the things we are going to cover today are already available in that tool, so you can start to exploit things after we have published them. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? So it's about technical content, but also about story. So we have three things we're going to cover today, and the first two are grouped in together, and the second one is, the third one is separate. But it's not only the technical part, it's also about story. And the story starts, like they mostly do, with a tweet. So how we ended up to be on the stage together. So Sravan here, he tagged me on a tweet where he said that Microsoft sucks, or something like that, can't remember. So he tagged me, it's right there after Satya Nadella. And I replied to him that, okay, if you want to send a direct message to you, we can take a look at that. Is it what you find? Is it really something, or is it not? And because I have worked with Microsoft a couple of years now, together with Microsoft Security Response Center, or MSRC, when I tweet something, I get a little bit attention, so MSRC guy said, hey, you can also message me. And then big guns arrived, so Alex is actually vice president of Microsoft Identity Security. And he said that, okay, we can help you. And then finally yesterday we met physically here in Black Hat, Asia. Okay, so I start by telling a little bit background information on Azure AD, and then go in technical details, and then Sravan is going to tell about something else. But first, you need to introduce yourself too. Sorry about that.
Well, I'm Sravan Akkaram, working in Accenture as a senior cybersecurity analyst. Recognized by Microsoft as security researcher in 2022 Q1, and being acknowledged more than 3 times for the findings I reported to Microsoft. It's like already I have quite a few people here, feeling a bit nervous. This is my first international conference. So, well, it's been a great honor and a privilege to present before you all and share those findings. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. So, technical stuff, and then Sravan is going to tell us a story how this all happened, if you will. So, first of all, how many of you is using Azure AD? Anyone? Okay, the rest of you are probably lying, or you don't know that. So, how many of you is using Teams? So you are using Azure AD. Okay. So, very short introduction. So Azure AD is a cloud-based identity and access management system from Microsoft, and it's used by, of course, Microsoft services like we have Azure here, Azure, Office, and also third parties like Salesforce. So you can configure your Salesforce to use Azure AD as an identity provider. So that's what it's meant for. Nothing more, nothing less. Then very technical details about Evolved Security Token Service, or eSTS. So I'm not going to read the slide to you. So you will get these slides in, 2 or 3 days maybe. So when you go to the Black Hat site in our talk, you can then download the slide, but they are not there yet. So for short, eSTS is a service that resides in login.microsoftonline.com. So whenever you are logging into Office or Azure AD portal, your credentials are sent to eSTS. And then that service is checking your credentials against your home tenant. And tenant, by the way, means that it's an instance of Azure AD of certain organization. So that's how that works. And then there's a distinction between home and resource tenants. So this is, again, technical background. So the home tenant is your tenant where your users are, and they are members, okay? And then we have the resource tenant. And your users are in that tenant guests. So when you come a guest to other tenant, for instance, if somebody outside your organization is sending you an invitation to join your teams, what happens is when your user accepts that, then an user object type of guest is created to the resource tenant. And just a technical detail, so these are linked together. So user object in your tenant, it has a PUID, which is same that alternative security ID in your resource tenant. So that way Azure AD knows that these are the same user. And then conditional access and multi-factor authentication. So first of all, this is a post-authentication feature. What that means, I'm going to show it to you in I think it's the next slide, or not. So what is a conditional access? So it's a kind of a firewall to Azure AD, which means that you can restrict, you can block or grant access to Azure AD based on certain criteria. And those criteria could be like which user you are, which device you are using, which application you are using, like for instance Outlook, and where you are using that, like from Singapore or Finland, where I come from. So based on those criteria, you can make a rule set. So do you allow or do you block? And usually when you allow users to access Azure AD, you are requiring MFA. So that's what people usually do. So let's move forward. So now we go to cross-tenant access settings. And what is this? So this feature, was it February last year? Or something like that, when this was announced?
Yep,
yeah. Yes, 7th, if I remember correctly. So this published, so this feature is for making easier to configure how your users can access other tenants. So that's the purpose. So in your home tenant, you configure things called outbound access settings, and you can block or allow access to other tenants. So it's default like I block everything, or I allow everything, or then you can configure it by tenant, which means that, okay, I block everything, but I allow my users to access that particular resource tenant. And then in resource tenant side, you can configure inbound access settings. So it's the same that you can block all the others' access, or you can allow all, or then you can do that per tenant. But here's a funny thing. So you can also trust the home tenant MFA, device compliance, and hybrid Azure AD join information. And what this means is that in the resource tenant, if you configure MFA, so that you require MFA from guest users. So now, when the users from home tenant are accessing that resource tenant, and they are requiring MFA, so if you already did MFA in your home tenant, then that tenant trusts that information, so you don't get 2 MFA prompts, so only 1. So that is for making accessing other tenant information easier. So that's actually a good, I would say quite good feature, but there are some caveats. And let's see what those are. So here is what happens when you are logging into your home tenant and you have a required MFA. So first, what happens here, you enter username and password to eSTS, and then eSTS is checking your username and password, and if they are correct, it will prompt you MFA if that's required. Okay, so this is how it normally works. So you as an admin of your tenant, you want that whatever our users are doing, I require MFA. Okay? But then Sravan finds something interesting. So that's not exactly true as a home tenant admin. So if the user is logging in directly to resource tenant, this is what happens. So again, eSTS is checking credentials against your home tenant, but it's not evaluating MFA at all. Instead, it's evaluating or using the MFA from the resource tenant. And this is what we call MFA bypass. And Microsoft didn't agree with that. They said it's not, but to us it is that. So what this means? So it means that the home tenant administrators, they can't enforce home tenant MFA or conditional access evaluation, whatever you have those. So you can't enforce that. And you can't block access using conditional access to other tenants. You can use cross-tenant access settings for that, but no conditional access. But this is funny. So the resource tenant admin can actually enforce your home tenant MFA. Sounds stupid, but this is how it goes. So if you are a resource tenant admin and you require MFA, and the user logs in here, and then Azure AD sees that, okay, this is requiring MFA, but it also says in cross-tenant access settings that I'm trusting home tenant MFA. So then Azure AD evaluates the conditional access rules in your home tenant and MFA. So the other tenant admin can enforce you to do MFA, but your home tenant can. So this is quite weird, at least for us. So if you are a threat actor or hacker, how you can exploit this? So first you need to have the credentials of a user. So you can either phish those using, well, here's one of my colleagues who created a tool called SquarePhish. You can use that. Or you can just buy them from the internet, because there are a lot of credentials out there. And then you log into any tenant that the user is member of as a guest, and which doesn't require MFA. Or then you can log into any B2C tenant or business-to-consumer tenants, because they don't require MFA at all. So you log in there, and then you can list all the tenants that the user is member of. And when you have that list, you can then pivot to those, try to log into those, because they might not have MFA enabled. And now I'm going to show you how to do this in practice. So I have a demo, but it's not live demo, so just screenshots. So first, you log into B2C tenant, for instance. So here, b2c.aadinternals.com. And you just provide a username and password. So no MFA, even though that your home tenant admin requires that. And then there's going to be a pop-up which says that the limited access. And I think this came here because of what you did. So you import Microsoft and they added that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So you're welcome. So then you go to and click Switch Directory, and then you will have a list of tenants where that user is member of. And now you can just go and click Switch, and you are able to switch that other tenant. So it's that easy. And same with my tool, AD Internals. So you just log into that other tenant, and then you say get Azure tenants, and it will list the tenants, and then you can access those again. But yes, then Sravan, how did we get up here, and what did we find actually?
Okay, well, how did we discover the findings, and how did we report it to Microsoft? So before letting you know further details, I'd like to ask you a question saying that, how many of you came across any finding when you were preparing or practicing for an exam? Anyone here? Well, I did found the same way when I was practicing. It all happened in the year 2021, in the mid-month of July. When I was practicing for one of the MS exam, there was one such question on access packages. As it was new concept for me, I never came across that concept, so I tried to explore it. When trying to access the portal, myaccess.microsoft.com, I observed something unusual. The URL part is appended with @domainname.onmicrosoft.com. As you can see here, you can see myaccess.microsoft.com/@microsoft.onmicrosoft.com/access packages. So this caught my attention. And I've used this to get further information. Like, let's say if I'm logging into my tenant, testname.onmicrosoft.com, I'll be logging into only with my tenant, and I can see the packages which were configured by me. What if I try to verify with other domains, other tenants? I was curious enough to try those. And when I tried with other domains, like let's say Facebook, Tesla, Meta, I was able to log in. Yeah, I was able to log in into the tenants. And also, the strange thing is, I was able to bypass the MFA of home tenant. It didn't prompt me any MFA of home tenant when I tried to access these domains. And finally, I ended up with Microsoft.onMicrosoft domain. So this domain has listed me few packages where I can request access. So that's how I came up with this initial finding, saying that initially it's bypassing the MFA of home tenant, like it's not prompting me an MFA. And then finally, I observed few packages. At that point, I'm not sure whether these packages are publicly accessible or not. I expected it to be either accessible by the users or the external users who are guests in Microsoft. So that was my initial finding. Sorry. So as I observed the tenant name .onmicrosoft.com, this particular fallback domain, I thought, okay, let's give it a try with other portals of Microsoft. Okay, we have many other portals, right? Teams.microsoft.com, portal.azure.com. And finally, I ended up with portal.azure.com and used the same by using portal.azure.com/@microsoft.onmicrosoft.com. This also gave me the same result by bypassing the MFA of home tenant, and I was able to log into Microsoft tenant. Not only Microsoft, whatever tenants, whatever domains we have across the organizations, I was able to log into any tenants. Though I can't access any information. Like initially, I was able to access Azure Active Directory overview information for a fraction of seconds. Then a pop-up would be notified saying that you don't have access. So that was my second finding. And yeah. Coming to the listing user tenant directories. So, okay, with these two findings, I considered it to report to Microsoft. Okay, but what further interesting was when I was recording my POC to report these cases to MS, I observed few pop-ups. Whenever I was trying to access cross-tenants, that is, the B2C tenants, where I'm not a guest and where I'm not a user, I observed few pop-up notifications, error notifications saying, as you can see in this slide, user account from INT provider does not exist in tenant LinkedIn cooperation and cannot access the application in the tenant. The account needs to be added as an external user in the tenant first. So this one gave me an idea to create a test scenario where I have configured an external user to collaborate in my tenant, and I gave him access to my resources. So what this user does, using my method, like generally people does usually access portal.azure.com, then they log in with the credentials, and then finally switch the directory to access the resource tenant. In my case, as I was able to bypass the MFA directly accessing the resource tenant, the same way the user was able to bypass the MFA of home tenant directly accessing the resource tenant. This made up my mind. Like I found, like, okay, this is an incredible finding, because all these years Microsoft being said us to trust the MFA of home tenant. That is, no need to configure any MFA in the guest tenant as your home tenant would satisfy the MFA. How many of you agree with this? Did anyone came across this one? Like, trust your home tenant MFA, and no need to configure any MFA in the guest tenant. So, okay. Cool. Yeah, I'll come back to that one. So that is the thing. So we have configured MFA in the home tenant, but there is no MFA in the resource tenant. And we were able to bypass that one and access the resource tenant, whatever the user is provisioned with the access. So that was my third finding. And with this third finding, I came to the fourth finding, that is listing of tenant memberships. So as I just said, whenever you try to access any resource tenant, initially you will log into portal.azure.com with your login credentials, and you will be providing the MFA, and then switching the directories or whatever tenants you are part of. But with my finding, let's say an attacker got credentials of your account, and he just knows that you work in so-and-so company. And if he tries to log in with those credentials, it would prompt him an MFA, so that it would restrict him access to further explore things. What if he uses my finding, that is using portal.azure.com/any cross-tenant domain, let's say Microsoft.microsoft.com, he can able to log in without providing any MFA, and he can able to switch the directories. He can able to find the list of tenants the user is part of. And if any tenant is not configured an MFA, then he would be able to access the resources in the tenant. Well, yeah, so these are my 4 findings. This we reported to MS. Actually, total we have reported 5 vulnerability cases to MS. We have reported and access packages two similar cases on the same API issue. So how the communication with Microsoft happened? The communication with Microsoft didn't quite go well. Like it took me a lot of efforts and a lot of challenges, insisting them to investigate further as they are closing the issue, saying that by design. So as you can see, initially we opened the case on 19th July 2021, and they have closed it as by design on 6th August. And further, I have tried to explain them, clarify them with further details. Like, no, this is not not by design, this is a security issue, because you are able to bypass an MFA of home tenant. After further insisting them, they suggested me to raise a new one. Not sure why, but they suggested me to raise a new one on 24th August. And then I raised a second case. This time I made sure to report only one issue. Like initially I reported 4 findings, whatever I just mentioned you. So as I thought, like Microsoft, the MSRC team is not able to clarify, not able to further dig into details. This time I made sure to report only one issue, that is MFA bypass of home tenant and accessing the resource tenant. It was raised on 2nd September, and even this case got closed as by design on 8th September. And before raising the second case, I did one thing. I want to make sure that whether my understanding is correct or not, I'm able to bypass the MFA. But MSRC team is saying that, no, it's a design issue. So what I did was, I raised a support ticket to Azure, asking them for clarification. And okay, so here you can see, they mentioned saying that, yes, you're absolutely right. If user have its own MFA on home tenant, he or she may not require any MFA requirement as guest user on your tenant, as his home tenant will verify the credentials or authenticate. Okay, so they are mentioning that you don't need any MFA in the guest tenant, as your home tenant will satisfy the MFA, which I'm able to bypass it. And when I shared this Azure support evidence, and a tech community link was shared by Azure support team, when I shared this evidence with MSRC, they mentioned it has inconsistent response from Azure support. So, well, after they said that, then again I raised one more support ticket to understand like how inconsistent the Azure support team is. Then you can see the second second email here with Azure support team. Even they have confirmed behavior, which I have just mentioned, like no need to configure any MFA in the resource tenant. Still, even for this also, MSRC teams mentioned that it's by design, and it's an inconsistent response from support team, and they will work on training the support team. And you can see, they asked me to suggest to report as feature request on 14th September. Then I thought, okay, the way it should be handled, they are not handling the case. So I tweeted on this one on 17th September, sharing these 2 evidences of Azure support team, what they have just stated. And I made sure to only tag MSRC team, Azure team, that's it. And as you can see, I have asked one question there in my tweet saying, bypassing of home tenant and accessing guest tenant through, I can't read it properly, but yeah. Bypassing MFA of home tenant and accessing guest tenant, is it by design or security issue? I asked that question and tagged MSRC team. So finally, they have, I think they made up their mind and they have reopened the case. On 30th September, they have reopened the case. And surprisingly, it went to development phase on 1st October. I thought like, wow, okay, they are working on this, working on a fix. And it's been in development phase for more than 3 months. And finally, when I followed up with them in 2022 January, they have closed this case as design issue, saying that they made a fix, saying that they didn't made up a fix, but they have updated the documents to make it clear that, and you can see here saying that we understand your concern, but this is being by design. And we have made sure the resource tenant is always responsible to MFA. They have updated this document, these 2 documents. So all these days, Microsoft being said that trust the MFA of home tenant, and now they are mentioning that you need to, the resource tenant is always responsible for MFA. And they have made this up clear in their documents. Rather than fixing the bug, which was in 3 months in development phase, they came up with this one of fixing the documents. Then we have this one document, new cross-tenant access settings. Oh, sorry, I have skipped it. Cool. So, yeah, and asking further questions to them. There was no response. Like I have, as I mentioned, my 4 findings. I have reported to them again, saying that. So this is something it should be security concern. It should be worked on. So there was no response, and even they didn't even try to acknowledge me for the efforts which I have shared with them, with the evidence which they have shared. As they have updated the documents, I was expecting any acknowledgement. And then finally, there was one such document, new cross-tenant access settings, released on 7th Feb. So this is one document where it says, like, there were concerns raised by people all over around the world saying that why we need to provide 2 MFAs, one MFA in the home tenant and one MFA in the resource tenant. It's why need to provide double MFA when one MFA is enough. So to overcome this issue, Microsoft came up with this new cross-tenant access setting feature where it says you need to trust the MFA of home tenant claims. So I have given the links here. You can go through that link later. Then I was exhausted explaining them all these days, all these months. Then finally, I have treated this case by tagging Dr. Azure AD. It was his greatness that he responded to my tweets and he asked me to reach out to him with his findings as he found that to be interesting. And then we had a talk and I explained him what all the findings I have observed. Then his response on my tweet had made an impact, I can say, made an impact on the MSRC, as even Alex has responded to my tweets. And also they mentioned, like, okay, let's connect, let's have a meeting, and we'll be discussing further. So that's how we had a meeting with MSRC on 17th Feb. And during that meeting, we have raised these other findings, saying that we are able to access a cross-tenant, bypassing the MFA. So what MSRC did was, they have raised the case internally. And as Nestori has shown you a pop-up earlier, whenever you try to access any cross-tenant, now you will be getting a pop-up saying that you doesn't belong to this tenant. Either you acknowledge or sign out. So that was a pop-up being developed by them rather than fixing the issue. And we have created one more case on API exposing tenant. As I just mentioned, we can able to list the tenants. So the tenants are being exposed. So that one we have raised on 21st Feb. And finally, my efforts, which I'm just mentioning, MFA bypass one, they have acknowledged me in the month of February, saying that you can see your acknowledgement is added to our February acts, which should be okay. And unfortunately, this does not qualify bounty. So yeah, now they have tried to acknowledge me. Earlier, they didn't acknowledge me, and now they have acknowledged me for the MFA bypass issue. And also, they have acknowledged for the cross-tenant issue, which I just mentioned, the pop-up notification, which they fixed it in the month of March. And API exposing tenants, this one, they have considered it as a big issue. Like, they took a lot of months, many months to work on this. And once we had a meeting with MSRC team, they mentioned, like, if they try to fix this bug, it might take more than 6 months for them to work on this. Anyway, they came to a conclusion to close it by design, and they have considered it to improve in the future, to develop a fix in the future. And then, yeah, we got acknowledged for this API exposing tenants in the month of November. And this is a summary of timeline, as you can see, from 2021 till 2022, we were still working on. And there was pending case, which will be revealed, which is going to go in 2023. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so as you can see, a lot of communication with Microsoft. It took over a year to get this point. Okay, but let's move forward. So another thing. So Sravan mentioned access packages. So what are access packages? So it's a tool for administrators that they can give permissions to certain resources to other users. And if you have a lot of those packages, you can put them in a catalog. Okay. So for instance, if you want that your contractors can access certain SharePoint site, you can build access package that they can apply to. So there's a portal where you can go as an outsider if you want to get access to that organization, like for instance, if we are a contractor, or then for guests and then for members. And this requires a certain version of Azure AD, which is, in this case, is Premium 2. Okay, so when we were starting, well, Sravan found out that we can access that site without MFA, right?
Yep.
Which is always nice. Yeah. So we used the Microsoft.com as an example here, actually. So when we were monitoring the traffic between the browser and the backend, we found out that there's an API endpoint it's calling. Here, for instance, it's access packages. And that allowed a user to list those packages the user is allowed to see. So if you are an outsider, you can see outsider packages and so on. Then we found out that there's another endpoint called access package catalogs, and there was a bug that allows the user to see all access package catalogs, so not just which were meant to you, but everything in that organization. Okay? And then when we further studied the API, we found out that there's an attribute called access packages in the catalog. So when we expanded that, we got information of all access packages in that organization. Even though you were outsider, you were able to get access packages of Microsoft internal stuff. Now, why this is important? So what do we do with these access packages as threat actors or hackers? Well, this is information that is returned from the API. So it has information like created by and modified by, right here. Who created this and who modified this last time. And it's important because those users are either global administrators or user administrators. And of course, you know that global admin is the next to God in Azure AD, so it's the most powerful. And then the user admin is like, you can create users, delete users, and modify users. And that was until last week, when they introduced a new role called Identity Governance Admin. So user admins can't do that anymore, but there's a more specific admin, Identity Governance Admin, who is the only role besides global admin who can modify those packages. But anyways, if somebody edited that access package like a year ago as a user admin, that name is still there. So you can now enumerate those if you want to. Now they fixed those things that you only can see now what you are allowed to see, so you are not able to see the whole access packages, only those that you are actually allowed to see. And here's an example from AD internals. So if you're an outsider and you go to Microsoft, you can list a couple of Microsoft administrators. And those are real administrators. They're real email addresses. And if you are a guest, like I am in Microsoft tenant, you can have more admins. So we can dump like 20 or 30 of those admins, and this is by design by Microsoft. I don't know why they are listing those names, because there's no use case for that, and they are not even shown in portal. But anyways, as an attacker or threat actor, you can now use this for social engineering or brute forcing or whatever you want to do. So this was our last finding, and then Sravan is going to share us a couple of details that what happened.
So even this communication, this was the access packages one, which I mentioned earlier. Even this communication didn't quite go well. Like we have opened the case on 25th Feb, and instead of knowing us about the case assessment, they asked about disclosure plans, and we were surprised. What about disclosure? Like we need to know the case assessment, right? So Nestori asked this one question to them through an email.
Yeah, I can tell this story. So they said that, yes, you get a bounty, but no, they said that you're not going to have a bounty because this is not so serious. And I responded there with the screenshot from their documentation that this is global admin and user admin, so I think this is serious.
Yep, right. So after this email, they have tried to reevaluate on CVRT on 18th March, and then they considered it as in scope, considering it as important CVRT and a high vulnerability report, and that's how you can see I have received a bounty too here. And then the issue got fixed on 19th May 2022. So yeah, finally it's been done. Like on 19th May, the case got closed, everything was done. And then this was on 20th December when I found the same vulnerability again in the access packages. So this one was with other domain. Like initially, whenever I tried to log in with corporate domain account, I was able to list those packages. But now with Outlook account, like whenever I tried to log in with an Outlook account, I found the same behavior which was earlier we have seen. So even this sounds to be interesting. Like we raised the case on 20th December, and it went into development phase on 19th Jan 2023. And when I followed up on case assessment, they have not responded. They just mentioned like we are still reviewing. So if the case has been moved to development phase, already a case assessment has been done. But I'm not sure like why they didn't update me. So after 2 months, in the month of 9th, they mentioned it's not in scope. Okay, well, then I thought, okay, let me share the earlier case number, which they have fixed. Like in earlier case, they considered as important severity bug, and now they are considered as low severity. What I did, then I shared the earlier case number on in 27th March, and you can see identity governance administrator role 4th April. So this is the document which now they have fixed it, saying that user administrators are not required to manage these access packages. Now that role should be moved to identity governance administrator role. Then I have mentioned them like we are presenting this in Black Hat Asia conference on 10th April. And then finally they responded on 17th April saying this is in scope, and they consider it for the bounty. But this time they consider it as medium severity bug. Like I have again responded to them saying that when earlier it was considered high severity, and when both the issues are on same API and both the reports are on the same way, then why the case now is considered as medium quality report? Then on 3rd May, I have mentioned them, and the issue got fixed on 4th May, and now they have considered it as high quality report, and I have been awarded with bounty. It's still in pending phase. Yeah. And this is a timeline. On completely May 4th, it got fixed.
Yes, so you can see it took almost 2 years from the first contact with Microsoft to get this fixed. So it sometimes can take a little bit time. Okay, so we are close to closing. So 3 things we want for you to remember from this case. So first of all is that home tenant MFA can be bypassed. So by looking to B2C tenants or certain kind of B2B tenants. Second thing, user tenant membership can be listed without MFA. So for those who didn't know that, now you do. Sorry about that. And then access packages can be used to list administrators, even though you cannot see all, but you can see some names. Okay, so we are moving to Q&A, so we thank you at this point. And if you have any questions, there are 2 mics on the aisle, so please stand up and reach the mic and ask your question. And if there's nobody, okay, you can also approach us after the session. I even have some stickers to my tool if you want those. So we're going to thank you.
Thank you.